the big problem we have with practicing non-aggression or being non-aggressive in the West is that we think it's the same thing as being totally passive. And this is the objection that is always raised, almost inevitably raised, that if we don't assert things according to how we think things ought to be or how we want things to be, then we don't really exist properly. We just sit there like a doormat. We have no active life at all. And this is something that is not easy to, the argument is not easy to get around. Not acting aggressively is seen as being hopelessly passive and giving up on life. In other words, being aggressive is the only modality there is. We're driving around in a car and that's the only gear there is. The gear of being aggressive. In a certain way, to a certain extent, we're obliged to be aggressive to a limited extent. So because we are all biological creatures living in this material world, whatever else you want to call it, physical world, we're bound to be, we need to be aggressive. If I want to get some water, I have to go and get that water, and that's aggressive. If I'm driving along and there's a big stone falling off the hillside under the road, I have to stop the car, get out and move that stone. And that's aggressive in the sense that here's something that I see as not being a good way for things to be, so I get out and deliberately change it. So it is what I see as being a good way for things to be. And on this level of interaction with our environment, that is pretty much essential. I don't know how else we'd get by, really. But as I was indicating earlier, the type of aggression that we're talking about is not this basic level of aggression that is necessary for us to engage in, so that certain things have to be done on purpose with a view to a goal. That is true that we need to do that, but it's not the most important part of our lives, in the sense that while it might be pragmatically necessary, it has nothing to do with us, who we really are, and us actually being in the world as we really are, which cannot be aggressive. Now, we all do go around asserting ourselves in a positive way. You say, I am this, I am that. Not necessarily in your face, arrogant, egotistical way, but in this way that we've all been led to understand that we have to assert ourselves by defining ourselves and saying who we are. You've come to understand that as being empowerment and not aggression at all, but just being clear about ourselves and valuing ourselves, being able to say who we are and what we like and what we don't like. That's essential for the everyday identity. But when we do that, we necessarily lie, because there isn't one of us who knows who we are. I might know my address or my telephone number, Generally I do know my address and telephone number, and that's useful. It's pretty useful, but that isn't anything to do with who I actually am. There's nothing to do with it at all. So that whilst I can assert non-essential stuff that's only peripherally or pragmatically useful, I can't assert anything at all on a deeper level. And if I do, then what I'm asserting is a lie. And it's a lie that I'm very much inclined to believe, and everyone else is very much inclined to believe. So there, straight away, there's me getting caught in the lie. And the lie has become my apparently or supposedly self-empowering statements about myself have become a hole, a 6-foot hole in the ground that I fall into, and languish there miserably, looking up at the sky above perhaps, and maybe there's a little bit of, I can see a little bit of light there. And maybe it's a deeper hole actually than 6 foot, it could be like 20 feet. So I can see a little postage size stamp size of the real world, and I can look up at it, and maybe I can try and communicate with the outside world. But that's what having a defined identity does. And so that's not a great situation. It's not self-empowering at all. What's self-empowering is to not know who you are and be there in this kind of exploratory way or tentative way or open-minded kind of a way that kind of means that you're very interested, but you don't have all the answers, and what's more, you don't even think that life is a matter of getting all the answers, which of course makes it all the more interesting, because if life was a matter of just not knowing who you were and then finding the answers, then finding the answers might seem like a bit of an adventure, but when the adventure's over, there's nothing, there's just you knowing who you are, which isn't who you are. So it's essentially kind of an open-ended learning thing, where we're in the world not to assert anything we think we know, but we're in the world and we're interested or curious about how things actually are, not in how we think it is, not in how we think the world is, or in how other people more particularly think it is. It's bad enough getting trapped in my own literal illusions, never mind getting trapped in other people's literal illusions. What the hell would I want to do that for? And yet we all do it. That is exactly what happens to us, and there's a certain utility in that, because we can all relate to each other on the same page. We all understand each other within that shared framework. So there is a practical utility there, of course. And it's good to have that to an extent, maybe, but the practical utility of being caught up in the same framework as everyone else is completely outweighed by the consequences if I stop realizing or fail to realize that it's just a shared understanding that's of pragmatic use only. Because then I take that shared understanding to be the world itself. And so in that case, although that certain degree of utility is still there, it's outweighed by the fact that I've become completely dissociated or dislocated from reality. And the point hardly needs to be laboured that to be dissociated fundamentally from reality isn't really good news. It's the worst kind of news there is in terms of the amount of difficulty or suffering it's going to put us through. As is the case with addictions, there is always the honeymoon phase. So when we successfully adapt ourselves, and this is what Jung says, to their shared understanding, the more we adapt, the better things seem to be. We get on fine with other people, everything seems to be working out for us. And it's like, this is what it means to grow up to and become adults, is to become adapted to the shared understanding. And so we have this great feeling of, yes, I'm becoming an adult now. I know what it's all about. I'm a big boy now. But all honeymoon phases last only a short while, which is why they're called honeymoon phases. The honeymoon, your whole married life can't be a honeymoon. So what happens is that the great feeling that we have wears thinner and thinner and thinner, and then we're left with this bleak reality of just being trapped in a way of understanding ourselves and the world, which is essentially arbitrary and pointless and sterile. And it's just a game that we have to keep on playing, even when the incentive to keep on playing it isn't, even when it isn't that exciting to keep on playing it anymore, because at this stage we don't know what else to do but play the game and keep on telling ourselves, if we're able, that we're actually partaking in life and we're doing the right thing and this is what we're supposed to be doing, etc., etc. And of course, when you've got a big collective of people, we are all going to be colluding with each other in this and telling each other, as well as telling ourselves, that yes, we've got it right, this is the way to live life. And so it becomes quite a toxic situation, in that because we're all asserting this is the way, whether we're asserting it out loud or whether we're asserting it in some other way, implied way, because that assertion is coming from the need to cover up the truth. If we ever meet anyone who disagrees with us, or we come across people who aren't adhering to what we see as a proper way of living life, we judge them and we come down heavy on them, and we're uncharitable towards them. And the pain we inflict on them is, of course, our own pain, our own unacknowledged pain of being caught in the trap that we won't acknowledge as being a trap, and we keep on telling ourselves isn't the trap. So that is actually the human situation. That's what it's like to live our life within the normal bounds of society. And normal bounds are all society has. All bounds are normal, and society is nothing if there's no part of it that isn't within the bounds of normality. Because the whole point of it, it has to be a shared understanding. We can't be pushing ahead with our own frontiers, because that defeats the object. So it's this type of aggression that we're talking about, this type of psychological aggression, whereby we assert on the one hand our identity and also assert the validity of the world that we have constructed for ourselves. So there's two assertions there. They both come down to the same assertion, which is the assertion of the positive self and the assertion of the positive world, both of which cannot be separated from each other. There's no positive self without a positive world, and there's no positive world without a positive self. So the idea is that unless we do this, we're being passive. Like if I don't assert who I am and what the world is, every step of the way, that's being disgracefully passive. And yet if I am open-minded and I go about in the world in an open way or a sensitive way or a questioning or playful way, with my eyes open and not asserting any dogmatic truths as I go along, that is supposed to be a weak way of living. And so very clearly, this argument that we will run into every time and everyone will hit you with is fascinatingly inverted. What we call being empowered and goal-orientated and what I'm calling aggressive is actually the most passive thing of all. It's where we completely hand over all responsibility and we just go along. We go along to get along because we won't get along unless we go along, so we go along. Even though on some level we know that's not a good way to live one's life. There's got to be some higher purpose than conforming to the system for the benefits, short-term benefits that that system will confer. And if any of us were to examine ourselves and say, am I happy about that? We'd definitely say, no, I'm not happy about that. It doesn't feel good. And at least in that case, we might carry on, but at least we would have stopped lying to ourselves and we'd be kind of honest about what we're doing. But because this reflection is so unpalatable to us, we are kind of obliged not to face it. We're obliged to never address it at all. So we can, when we look around and see other human beings doing their thing, whatever it is they're doing, going here and going there, walking down the street, it's possible to tell pretty much by just looking at people, looking at their faces or looking at their eyes, whether they're positively asserting their identity within an assumed positive world or not. Because there's a type of a blankness there, in the sense that we aren't being alive to the moment, as all the mindfulness teachers say, but rather we're engrossed in a task, which is that to fulfill whatever plan we've got, to do the next thing that we've got on our list of things to do. Basically, not to put too fine a point on it, we're stuck in our heads. And being stuck in our heads means that we're being aggressive. Even if I'm just thinking, well, after I go here, I've got to go to the shoe shop and buy myself a new pair of shoes, and then I've got to go to the chemist, buy some cough syrup or Nurofen or laxative or whatever it is. That may not sound aggressive. It's not our classic idea of aggressive. Sure, the guy's only just going to the shop and then he's going to go to the chemist. What's so aggressive about that? But the thing is that we're creating a wall-to-wall, a world that is wall-to-wall units of known stuff. We're creating the domain of the known. We're blocking out that space where we're there, not knowing what we're doing, or where we're going, or why we're there, or anything like that. We haven't time for that space of wide open questioning, which is hugely potent in the sense of creativity and potentially incredibly active and not at all passive. But on the other hand, when we are walled in the domain of the known, which is created by our aggressive activity or by the aggressive activity of thought, then all our activity is purely for the sake of reaffirming the reality of our prison, which wouldn't actually be real to us. It wouldn't appear subjectively real, and therefore it wouldn't be a prison unless we continually reasserted it all the time. So we do continually reassert the reality of our prison, and we do continually reassert the reality of the defined or positive self, which is also our prison, which is the same prison. And we do that all the time. We very rarely take a break. We very rarely take a break and practice non-aggression. Instead, we're constantly practicing aggression. I am this, the world is this, he is that, etc., etc., all of those type of statements. And some of the statements, we identify a reality that we feel good about and we get elated. And at other times we identify a reality that we really don't like, and then we get down in the dumps and miserable. But both the elation or the pleasure and the despair or depression are both our prison. They're both bricks in the prison wall, exactly the same. Euphoria and dysphoria are exactly the same. They're both equal our prison. They both equal the positive self. So the alternative, which is not being aggressive, just means not identifying things as being anything. Because we can't do that anyway, because if we do, that's a lie. If we had any interest or curiosity about the world, we'd stop lying to ourselves the whole time and put all our preconceptions and ideas aside and see what the world is, or see who we are, which is the non-aggression. So that's us not asserting a reality. So the fundamental point is, we can't assert a reality. Every time I assert a reality, or say what I see as being true, I lie. Every time I assert a reality, I create a false reality that I can't see as being a false reality. And so that is the nature of our predicament, the fact that we keep on creating a false reality for ourselves every time we assert something. This is this, or this means this, or that means that. Okay, thanks for watching.